Good evening, patient and tenacious history enthusiasts. Tonight, we embark on a journey that is a little deeper, a chronicle of innovation we so often overlook, a saga of the objects we use every single day without a second thought. We are diving into the long and wonderfully boring history of eating utensils. Forget the epic battles and royal intrigues you might expect. Tonight, our focus is on the spoon, the fork, and the knife. Yes, you heard that correctly. Cutlery. It might sound trivial, even sleep-inducing, but believe me, hidden within its simplicity is the very footprint of human civilization itself. So, before you perhaps reach for a snack or a cup of tea, let's settle in and prepare for an exploration that might just change the way you look at a fork forever. Let us begin our journey back to a time when humans ate in the most fundamental way possible, using the tools nature gave them, their own hands. In the dawn of human civilization, the concept of eating utensils as we know them today was entirely non-existent. Our ancestors, preoccupied with hunting and gathering for survival, had neither the time nor the need to create specialized instruments for consuming their meals. They used their hands directly to take food from its source or from the game and plants they collected. Large portions of hunted meat might have been torn apart by hand or with teeth, and softer foods like fruits or vegetables would have been eaten directly. Even liquids, such as early soups or stews, were likely slurped straight from their containers, which could have been animal hides, coconut shells, or other natural forms. This period of eating with hands lasted for thousands of years and was the universal norm across the entire world. While it sounds unhygienic by our modern standards, in the context of prehistoric life, it was the most efficient and practical way to meet the basic need for nutrition. There was no cutlery manufacturing industry, no shops selling spoons and forks, and the idea of dining etiquette involving specific tools had not yet been conceived. Cleanliness might have been a concern, especially after a hunt or labor, but water and resources for cleaning were also likely limited, making eating by hand an unavoidable reality. As societies evolved and more complex cooking techniques emerged, we began to see a gradual evolution in how humans interacted with their food. While hands remained the primary tool, small innovations started to appear to assist in the process of eating. For example, simple tools made from wood or bone might have been used to retrieve hot food from a fire or to spear larger pieces of meat to make them easier to consume. We also see the use of shells or hollowed-out stones as a kind of proto-bowl or vessel for serving and eating soupy foods. This development was likely driven by various factors, including the desire to avoid heat or dirt, as well as the emergence of foods with textures that were more difficult to handle with hands alone. In various early cultures, we can find simple artifacts that point to these initial steps toward cutlery. For instance, in some archaeological sites, primitive skewers made from sharp twigs or small animal bones have been discovered, which were likely used for holding or eating small pieces of meat. While these were not forks in the modern sense, they demonstrate the early thinking about using an intermediary tool for eating. Further development in eating utensils was often closely tied to advances in metallurgy and craftsmanship. As humans began to master the techniques of working with metals like bronze and iron, these new materials allowed for the creation of tools that were stronger, more durable, and could be crafted into more specific designs. The knife was one of the first eating utensils to undergo a significant evolution. Initially used as a multi-purpose tool for hunting, cutting, and various other tasks, knives gradually began to be used at the dining table as well, primarily for cutting large pieces of meat into smaller, more manageable portions. In various ancient cultures, such as in Egypt and Rome, a personal knife became an important part of a person's toolkit. Spoons also saw a similar development, starting from simple forms like shells or hollowed-out pieces of wood, and evolving into more structured tools with a handle and a deeper bowl, carved from metal or carved wood. The spoon became particularly useful for consuming soups, porridges, and other liquid-based foods that became more common in the human diet with the development of agriculture and cooking techniques. The fork, on the other hand, has a slightly slower and more controversial history. While early forms, such as two-pronged or three-pronged forks, may have appeared as tools for cooking or moving hot meat, their use as a personal eating utensil developed relatively late. Initially, the fork was often associated with excess and luxury, and in some circles, it was even considered an unnecessary or even impious tool. Eating with a knife and a spoon was considered more elegant and in line with prevailing social norms. However, over time, particularly among the nobility in medieval and Renaissance Europe, the fork gradually began to be accepted as part of the standard set of eating utensils, especially to help hold meat steady while it was being cut with a knife, and to eat foods that were more difficult to handle with a spoon. The evolution of the fork's design is also interesting, from a simple form with 2 or 3 straight tines to a more ergonomic shape with 4 curved tines, which is more efficient for both spearing and scooping food. The spread and adoption of eating utensils were also heavily influenced by cultural and social factors. What was considered a norm or proper dining etiquette varied greatly from one culture to another, and changes in eating practices often went hand in hand with changes in social structure and technology. For instance, in some East Asian cultures, chopsticks have been the primary eating utensil for centuries, reflecting unique culinary traditions and philosophies. Meanwhile, in Europe, the adoption of the fork as a common eating utensil took a considerable amount of time and faced various forms of resistance before it was finally widely accepted. The development of dining etiquette also played a crucial role in standardizing the use of cutlery. Rules about how to properly use a spoon, fork, and knife, as well as when and how different utensils should be used, gradually took shape and became an important part of social manners, especially among the upper classes. Etiquette manuals began to appear, providing detailed guidance on polite dining practices, including how to use cutlery with grace and efficiency. With the Industrial Revolution and advances in manufacturing technology in the 18th and 19th centuries, the production of cutlery underwent a major transformation. Utensils that were once luxury items owned only by a wealthy few began to be mass-produced at a lower cost, making them more accessible to the general population. New materials like stainless steel also came into use, offering a more durable, corrosion-resistant, and easy-to-clean alternative to traditional metals like silver or pewter. The design of cutlery also became more standardized and functional, although variations in style and ornamentation still reflected the aesthetic trends of the time. This development significantly changed the landscape of eating utensils, from unique handcrafted objects to mass-produced commodities available in almost every household. Cutlery was no longer just a tool for eating. It had become an integral part of modern dining culture and an expression of lifestyle. However, even in this modern era, the legacy of the tradition of eating with hands can still be found in many parts of the world. In numerous cultures, particularly in South Asia, the Middle East, and Africa, eating with hands remains a common practice and is often associated with a more intimate and satisfying dining experience. There are specific rules and etiquette that govern how to eat with hands, including the use of the right hand, as the left hand is often considered unclean, the number of fingers used, and how to pick up food in a way that is both polite and tidy. This practice is not just a matter of habit, but also has deep cultural and religious roots. Eating with hands is often seen as a way to better appreciate the food and to connect more directly with what we consume. The texture, temperature, and aroma of food can be experienced more intensely when we touch it directly. Therefore, while modern cutlery has become an integral part of our lives, the tradition of eating by hand remains alive and relevant for many people around the world, reminding us of the most basic roots of how humans interact with their food. This is just the beginning of our long story about cutlery. In the chapters to come, we will delve deeper into the design evolution of spoons, forks, and knives from various cultures and time periods, the materials used, the role of social status and wealth in the ownership of cutlery, and the various dining customs and etiquette associated with them. We will also look at how small innovations in design and material have had a major impact on our everyday dining experience. So, please stay with us on this boring, yet hopefully enlightening journey. Let us now turn our full, undivided attention to the knife. Before it was a humble dinner companion, the knife was mankind's first and most crucial tool. It was a weapon, a craftsman's implement, a key to survival. For millennia, the same sharp edge that could skin a deer or defend against a foe was the very same edge used to portion food. For much of human history, a man's personal knife, often a dagger or a small, single-edged blade called a seax, was an extension of his own being. It never left his side. Consequently, when it came time to eat, there was no expectation for a host to provide such a personal and potentially dangerous item. You brought your own. The early dining table was, in a sense, a gathering of armed individuals, and the etiquette of the time reflected this tense reality. Using your own dagger to spear a piece of meat from a central serving platter and bring it to your own trencher or wooden plate was standard practice. From there, you would use that same sharp point to hold the meat steady while you tore at it with your hands and teeth, or to slice off a more manageable piece. The intimacy with one's own knife gave rise to a very specific set of unwritten rules. To lick your blade, for instance, was considered utterly vulgar, a sign of low breeding. After all, this was a tool used for all manner of tasks, not all of them savory. More importantly, pointing your knife at another person across the table was a severe breach of conduct, an implicit threat that could escalate a simple meal into a deadly confrontation. The table was a temporary truce, and the knife was a constant reminder of the world's inherent violence. This began to change, slowly at first, but then decisively. The most famous, though perhaps apocryphal, story attributes a major shift to one of 17th century France's most powerful figures, Cardinal Richelieu. Tired of the boorish habit of his dinner guests picking their teeth with the sharp points of their knives, and perhaps wishing to subtly reduce the potential for dinner table assassinations, he allegedly ordered that all the knives at his table have their points ground down and rounded. This act, born of a desire for decorum and safety, set a new standard for the European aristocracy. The table knife was beginning to shed its identity as a weapon and was being domesticated into a specialized dining instrument. This divergence created two distinct evolutionary paths for the knife. In the kitchen, the knife remained a tool of sharp, utilitarian purpose, with blades designed for chopping, slicing, and butchering. But at the table, the knife became something else entirely. It became blunter, its primary role shifting from aggressive cutting to gentle assistance. It was used more as a pusher, helping to guide food onto a spoon or fork, or as a spreader for butter and other soft condiments. The once sharp tip that could pierce flesh was now a rounded, harmless curve. This transformation was cemented during the 18th and 19th centuries with the advent of mass manufacturing, which allowed for the creation of entire sets of specialized cutlery. Suddenly, there wasn't just a knife. There were fish knives, fruit knives, butter knives, and steak knives, each with a specific shape and function designed to handle a particular food without shredding it. The dagger that once sat at the dinner table had finally been tamed, its wild nature polished away into a symbol of refined, civilized dining. Now, let us consider the spoon, the knife's far more agreeable and ancient dining partner. While the knife was born of violence and utility, the spoon was born of a simple, universal need to consume liquids and grains. Its origins are so fundamental that they predate formal archaeology. It was likely one of the very first tools conceived after the use of hands alone. Early humans would have used naturally occurring objects that mimicked its function, such as seashells or cupped pieces of wood. Indeed, the Latin word for spoon, cochlea, also means spiral shell, a direct nod to this organic origin. Unlike the fork, the spoon faced no moral or social resistance. It was universally accepted because it was universally needed. For the vast majority of people throughout history, the daily meal was not a steak to be cut, but a porridge, pottage, or soup to be ladled. The spoon was the essential tool of the common person, the vessel that delivered sustenance. The material of a spoon was a direct and obvious indicator of one's social standing. The humblest peasant might use a spoon carved from wood or animal horn, functional but crude. A merchant or a member of the growing middle class might own spoons made of pewter, a soft metal alloy that was more durable than wood, but still affordable. But for the nobility and the fabulously wealthy, spoons were crafted from silver or even solid gold. They were not just utensils, they were portable displays of wealth, status symbols to be admired and inventoried. They were often intricately decorated, their handles engraved with family crests, floral patterns, or religious figures. A particularly notable tradition in Europe was the apostle spoon, a silver spoon with a small statue of an apostle at the end of its handle. A set of 12 or 13, including Jesus or Mary, was a highly prized possession, and giving a single apostle spoon as a christening gift was a common practice among the wealthy, intended to bestow both material and spiritual good fortune upon the child. This tradition highlights how the simple spoon could be imbued with deep cultural and symbolic meaning, far beyond its practical use. And now we arrive at the fork, the most dramatic and scandalous character in our story. While the knife was a necessity and the spoon a comfort, the fork was, for a very long time, seen as a decadent and offensive intruder at the European table. Its journey from a kitchen tool to an accepted piece of cutlery was a long and arduous one, filled with religious condemnation and social ridicule. The earliest forms of forks were large, two-pronged implements used in the kitchen for lifting and carving large joints of meat, a function they served for centuries. The idea of a small, personal fork for individual dining was a foreign concept in most of Europe. Its origins as a dining utensil lie in the opulent and highly refined court of the Byzantine Empire. There, in the Eastern Roman Empire, a small, elegant fork was a sign of sophistication. The fork's introduction to Western Europe was met with immediate suspicion and hostility. The most cited story involves a Byzantine princess who, upon marrying a Venetian doge in the 11th century, horrified the court by refusing to eat with her hands and instead using her own small, golden two-pronged fork. The local clergy were appalled. They saw the fork as an instrument of excessive vanity and an affront to God. St. Peter Damian famously condemned it, arguing that God in his wisdom has provided man with natural forks his fingers, Therefore, it is an insult to him to substitute them with artificial metal forks when eating. The argument was that using such an unnatural tool was a rejection of the body God had given. Furthermore, its sharp dual prongs were seen by some as a miniature representation of the devil's pitchfork, making it an almost diabolical implement in the eyes of the pious. When the princess died tragically of the plague, it was preached from the pulpits as divine retribution for her decadent, fork-wielding ways. Despite this rocky start, the fork slowly gained a foothold in Italy during the Renaissance. The country's flourishing trade and renewed interest in classical refinement created a culture where novelty and elegance were prized. Furthermore, the Italian diet, which increasingly included pasta dishes slick with sauce, made eating with just fingers or a spoon a messy affair. The fork offered a practical solution. It became a marker of sophistication among the wealthy merchant class and nobility, a way to signal that one was refined and civilized. However, its journey out of Italy was incredibly slow. When it reached France, reputedly with Catherine de' Medici, and later England, it was widely mocked. Men who used forks were derided as effeminate, as dandies who were too delicate to touch their own food. It was considered unmanly. For decades, the fork remained an object of curiosity and ridicule, a strange Italian affectation. It wasn't until the 18th century, when travel and cultural exchange became more common and the rising middle class sought to emulate aristocratic manners, that the fork finally began to shed its controversial reputation and become a standard fixture on the European dining table, taking its place as the final, and most reluctant, member of the cutlery tree we know today. While Europe was engaged in its centuries-long, often dramatic, debate over the fork, an entirely different dining philosophy was taking hold across a vast portion of Asia. Here, the dominant tool was not a trio of metal implements, but a pair of elegant, deceptively simple sticks, chopsticks. Their story begins in ancient China, likely as early as 5,000 years ago. But like so many ancient tools, their first use was not at the dinner table. The earliest chopsticks were probably twigs or small branches used for cooking specifically, for retrieving pieces of food from large pots filled with boiling water or hot oil. Their length provided a safe distance from the heat, making them ideal for this task. It was a practical solution to a simple problem, and for thousands of years, they remained primarily a kitchen utensil. The transition from the cooking pot to the dining table was a gradual one, but it was profoundly influenced by one of Asia's most significant philosophical figures, Confucius. A scholar and vegetarian who lived in the 5th century BXC, Confucius advocated for a philosophy of peace and non-violence that extended to all aspects of life, including the dining room. He believed that the presence of sharp instruments, like knives, at the table was inappropriate. A knife, he argued, was a tool of the slaughterhouse, a reminder of the violent act of butchering an animal. To bring such an object to a place of communal eating was to bring an element of aggression and unpleasantness. The honorable and upright man, he taught, keeps well away from both the slaughterhouse and the kitchen. Following this philosophy, food should arrive at the table already cut into small, bite-sized pieces, prepared by the cook and ready for consumption. This cultural shift rendered the table knife obsolete and created the perfect opening for chopsticks to become the primary dining utensil. They were gentle, non-threatening, and perfectly suited for picking up these PI-portioned morsels. As the use of chopsticks spread from China, they were adopted and adapted by neighboring cultures, leading to distinct variations in their design, each subtly reflecting the cuisine and customs of its region. Chinese chopsticks, for instance, are typically longer and thicker, with squared or rounded sides and blunt, flat tips. This design is well suited for reaching across the wide, communal serving dishes common in Chinese family-style dining. Japanese chopsticks, by contrast, are generally shorter and more delicate, tapering to a fine, pointed tip. This pointed end is exceptionally useful for the Japanese diet, which features a great deal of whole fish, as it allows the diner to easily pick out small bones with precision. Japanese chopsticks are also often made of lacquered wood or bamboo and are considered highly personal items, rarely shared. Korean chopsticks present another unique variation. They are typically of medium length, flat and rectangular in shape, and traditionally made of metal, such as brass or silver, and more commonly today, stainless steel. The historical use of metal is often attributed to Korean royalty, who used silver chopsticks in the belief that they would tarnish and change color if they came into contact with poisoned food, a very real concern for rulers of the time. Let us now return to the West, where, by the 19th century, the knife, fork, and spoon had finally become an established and accepted trio. But the story does not end with acceptance. It enters a new phase, an era of almost comical complexity and social anxiety, the Victorian era. As the Industrial Revolution created a new and rapidly growing middle class, these families found themselves with disposable income and a powerful aspiration to climb the social ladder. The most obvious way to display one's newly acquired status was to emulate the customs of the aristocracy, and no custom was more intricate or laden with rules than dining. The simple set of 3 utensils was no longer enough. The Victorian table became a bewildering battlefield of hyper-specialized cutlery, with a unique tool designed for almost every conceivable type of food. It was a way to signal not just wealth, the ability to afford a massive set of sterling silver, but also education and refinement. The sheer variety of utensils that appeared during this period is staggering. A formal dinner setting could present a diner with a dozen or more pieces of cutlery, and knowing which one to use and when was a test of one's social standing. There were, of course, the standard dinner fork and knife, but alongside them, you might find a smaller fish fork and fish knife, the latter with a wide, dull blade designed to separate flesh from bone without cutting it. There was the tiny, 3-pronged oyster fork, the only fork traditionally placed to the right of the plate. You might find snail forks, lobster picks, and marrow scoops for extracting every last bit of richness from a bone. There were specialized grape shears for snipping a small bunch from the main stalk, and asparagus tongs for elegantly lifting a single spear without dirtying one's fingers. Even condiments were not safe from this trend. There were ornate butter picks, pickle forks, and mustard spoons. This was not about practicality. It was about performance. The complexity of the table setting was a form of social gatekeeping. If you didn't know how to navigate the sea of silver, you clearly didn't belong. This period of ornate excess, however, was built on a fundamental material problem. For those who could afford it, cutlery was made of silver, which, while beautiful, is a soft metal that tarnishes easily and requires constant, labor-intensive polishing. For everyone else, the options were less than ideal. Carbon steel knives would rust if not meticulously cared for, and pewter was even softer than silver and could bend easily. A true revolution was needed, and it came not from a silversmith or a designer, but from a metallurgist focused on an entirely different field. In 1913, in the industrial city of Sheffield, England, a man named Harry Brearley was working to solve a military problem: the erosion of the internal barrels of guns. He was experimenting with different steel alloys, searching for one that was more resistant to corrosion. In the course of his experiments, Brearley created several new alloys, including one with a high percentage of chromium. After testing, he tossed the metal samples onto a scrap heap. Weeks later, He happened to notice that while the other pieces of metal on the heap had rusted, his chromium steel sample was still bright and untarnished. He had accidentally discovered what he initially called rustless steel, while the arms industry was slow to see its potential, really immediately realized its application for cutlery. This invention, later branded as stainless steel, was a monumental breakthrough for the world of dining. It was hard, durable, did not rust or tarnish, did not react with acidic foods, did not impart a metallic taste, and most importantly, it could be mass-produced relatively cheaply. Stainless steel became the great equalizer of the dinner table. It made clean, durable, and respectable-looking cutlery available to everyone, cementing the modern set of knife, fork, and spoon as a standard fixture in households across the globe, and finally bringing our long, meandering story into the modern age. With the material question largely settled by the triumph of stainless steel, the 20th century became an age focused on design. The form and aesthetic of cutlery began to closely mirror the dominant artistic and cultural movements of the time, turning the dining table into a gallery of contemporary style. In the 1920s and 30s, the ornate, nature-inspired fussiness of the Victorian and Art Nouveau periods gave way to the bold glamour of Art Deco. Cutlery from this era reflects the movement's obsession with speed, luxury, and geometry. Handles became sleek and streamlined, often featuring angular patterns, zigzags, and stylized sunburst motifs. Designers experimented with new materials for handles, incorporating exotic woods, ivory, and especially bakelite and early plastic that could be produced in vibrant colors, adding a splash of modern theatricality to the table. Art Deco cutlery was confident, assertive, and looked forward to a future of technological marvel and sophisticated living. After the Second World War, design philosophy took another sharp turn with the rise of mid-century modernism. This movement, with its deep roots in Scandinavian and German Bauhaus principles, rejected ornament for its own sake and instead championed the idea that form should follow function. The new aesthetic was one of clean lines, organic curves, and profound simplicity. Mid-century modern cutlery was minimalist and ergonomic. Designers like Denmark's Arne Jacobsen created iconic sets, such as his Model 600 for Torg Jensen, which was forged from single pieces of stainless steel, blurring the line between handle and head into one seamless, sculptural form. The focus was on the feel of the utensil in the hand and the purity of the material itself. It was an optimistic design language, reflecting a post-war desire for order, efficiency, and an unadorned, honest approach to daily life. This was cutlery stripped down to its essential truth, a quiet celebration of function and understated beauty. Then, as a reaction against the perceived coldness and rigidity of modernism, the late 20th century saw the rise of postmodernism. This movement delighted in irony, playfulness, and historical reference. Cutlery design became a playground for experimentation, sometimes with wonderfully absurd results. Designers in Italy, particularly those associated with the Alessi Company, created utensils that were as much conversation pieces as they were functional tools. Philip Stark, for example, designed cutlery that looked almost alien, with fluid, unconventional shapes that challenged what a fork or spoon should be. Handles might be oversized, materials might be brightly colored plastic, and the overall effect was often witty and whimsical. Postmodernism questioned the very idea of a correct design, proving that even an object as mundane as a spoon could be a vehicle for artistic commentary and a source of daily delight. Amidst these high-minded design movements, another, far more humble utensil was quietly proliferating: becoming an icon of a different kind of modernity, the spork. Part spoon, part fork. The spork is often seen as a symbol of utilitarian compromise. Though widely associated with fast food chains and school cafeterias of the mid-20th century, the concept is surprisingly older, with patents for combination eating utensils appearing as far back as the late 19th century. Its rise to ubiquity, however, was driven by the logic of pure efficiency. For institutions and fast food businesses, the spork was a dream solution. It was cheap to manufacture, requiring only one mold instead of 2 or 3. It simplified inventory and reduced waste. It was the perfect tool for a culture increasingly focused on speed, convenience, and disposability. Yet, the spork is a famously flawed invention. It is a master of none. As a spoon, its tines allow liquid to seep through, making it a poor choice for soup. As a fork, its tines are often too short, thick, and blunt to effectively spear many types of food. It exists in a state of functional mediocrity. For its critics, the spork represents the pitfalls of prioritizing efficiency over experience, a tool that performs all tasks poorly in the name of convenience. But for its defenders, it is a clever, unpretentious solution to a practical problem. It is the utensil of the people, found in lunchboxes, backpacks, and take-out bags around the world. Whether it is a utopian dream of functional harmony or a failed experiment in design compromise, the spork has carved out a permanent, if slightly awkward, niche in the grand, boring history of what we eat with. The 20th century also brought a crucial, and far more noble, evolution in utensil design: the development of adaptive cutlery. As medical understanding and social consciousness grew, designers began to address the fact that the standard knife, fork, and spoon are difficult, if not impossible, for many people to use. For individuals with conditions like arthritis, Parkinson's disease, or limited hand strength, the simple act of eating could be a daily struggle. This led to the creation of specialized adaptive utensils. These tools feature innovations such as built-up, cushioned grips for easier holding, weighted handles to counteract tremors, and angled or curved blades and tines that reduce the amount of wrist motion required. In the 21st century, this has culminated in high-tech electronic utensils that use gyroscopes and motors to actively stabilize the head of the spoon or fork, allowing individuals with severe tremors to eat independently and with dignity. This field of design is a powerful reminder that the ultimate purpose of a tool is to empower its user, and that true innovation is often found in the pursuit of inclusivity. Finally, no history of modern cutlery would be complete without acknowledging the rise and potential fall of its most ubiquitous and problematic form, the disposable plastic utensil. Born from the post-war boom in consumer convenience and the rise of the fast food, airline, and takeout industries, single-use plastic cutlery became the symbol of an eat-anywhere, clean-up-never culture. It was cheap, lightweight, and waterproof, the ultimate tool for a society on the move. For decades, billions of plastic forks, spoons, and knives were manufactured, used once for a matter of minutes, and then discarded, with little thought given to their final destination. Today, we are living in the environmental reckoning of that convenience. The staggering accumulation of plastic waste in our oceans and landfills has forced a global conversation about our disposable culture. This has sparked a new wave of innovation, one driven not by style or function, but by sustainability. We are now witnessing a frantic search for alternatives. There is cutlery made from biodegradable plastics derived from cornstarch, utensils carved from bamboo or pressed palm leaves, and even the novel concept of edible cutlery, made from hardened grains that can be eaten as a snack after the meal is finished. There is also a powerful movement advocating for a return to the past, carrying a personal, reusable set of utensils, just as our ancestors once carried their personal daggers. In a strange historical echo, the desire to reduce our environmental footprint is bringing us full circle. The story of cutlery, which began with a personal tool carried out of necessity, now finds itself returning to that very same concept, this time driven by a sense of global responsibility. It proves that even the most boring of histories is never truly over. It simply waits for the next problem to solve. So, our long journey reaches its end, from bare, primal hands to meticulously designed stainless steel, from a personal dagger at the table to a disposable spork in a takeout bag. Every object tells a part of our story. These tools are far more than just tools. They are mirrors, reflecting the very essence of our societies and our anxieties. The knife speaks of our inherent violence, but also our long, slow quest for civility and peace at the table. The spoon shows our fundamental need for sustenance and community, a simple vessel that fed empires and families alike. The fork reveals our complex relationship with status, sophistication, and the fear of being seen as uncivilized. And chopsticks represent an entirely different path, a philosophy of harmony and non-aggression built into every meal. Each innovation was a response to a problem. Food was too hot to handle. Sauces were too messy for fingers. Silver tarnished. Plastic filled the oceans. At every step, we adapted. We invented. We refined. We created solutions that, in turn, created new problems to be solved. The history of cutlery is the history of human ingenuity in miniature, a constant cycle of need and invention. So the next time you sit down for a meal, pause for just a moment. Look at the utensil in your hand, whether it's a fork, a spoon, or a pair of chopsticks. It is not a simple object. You are holding thousands of years of history, a story of technology, art, religion, and social struggle. You are holding the quiet, accumulated wisdom of countless generations who simply wanted a better way to eat. Because sometimes, as we have seen, the most boring objects are the ones that tell the most extraordinary stories of all.